There's a super cool study that had two groups of people who considered themselves lucky and then people who considered themselves unlucky. They were given the task of going through a newspaper and counting all the images within it. Lucky people tended to finish in just seconds, whereas unlucky people took over 2 minutes to finish. Why is this? The newspaper had a message in it that read, "If you see this message, stop counting. There are 43 photographs within the newspaper." I posted this study on my TikTok, and one of the first things people said is, so that just means that lucky people are more observant, right? The answer is no, because the message that said stop counting, there are 43 photographs within this newspaper took up half a page and was impossible to miss. So some other people within the comments said this. They said, well, I would have seen that message and I would have kept counting anyway. What if the unlucky people just decided to do that? And that would be a valid point, but the thing is, there's a second message within the newspaper that says that stop counting, tell the researcher that you saw this, and you will win a monetary prize of $250. Can you guess which group tended to see that message more often? If it was true that unlucky people simply just kept counting past the first sign, why didn't they report the second message either? One might argue, well, they just blindly trusted. Why would they report that? The researchers were probably trying to trick them. But in this scenario, what in the world do you have to lose? At most, you're gonna maybe look like kind of a fool to the researchers, and at best, you will win $250. The study just emphasizes that people who are quote unquote unlucky are just unlucky due to their negative attitude on life and their inability to take opportunities even though they are staring at them right in the face, as was the case of this study. They had no reason to not either stop counting or to mention the $250 reward, but again, unlucky people just didn't do that. And it's not because they didn't have the same opportunities that lucky people did. It's because of their negativity that they failed to even act on those opportunities in the first place. This book, called The Luck Factor by Richard Wiseman, goes over the study, and it also goes over a lot of other things that people in the comments pointed out that are important to know. Lucky people are not people who are blessed with some kind of magical power, as Richard Wiseman did a study where he had lucky and unlucky people participate in a lottery, and they found that both groups tended to do the same. And it has nothing to do with intelligence either, as again, he tested people who are lucky or unlucky, and their intelligence levels were also about the same. So if statistically their luck is the same, their intelligence is the same, the only thing that's really different is their attitude. And of course, a very valid criticism of this is that, well, this is correlational and not causational. Luckily, Richard Wiseman had a thing called the Luck School, which he put participants through, and he found that participants were able to actually increase their luck and their happiness. He found that, I quote, 80% of people were now happier, more satisfied with their lives, and perhaps most important of all, luckier. If you want more insight into what kind of programs he put the participants through, you can check out the book that I was talking about earlier called The Luck Factor, and you can also check out The Serendipity Mindset. I'm not sponsored by either of these things, but these are the books that I kind of pulled a lot of these ideas from. And if you're still skeptical on this idea that positive mentalities result in better outcomes, there's a lot of other research that supports this point as well. There's a study that looked at kids who were good and bad at math, and you know what one of the most important predictors to how well they did at math was? That was as important as IQ. It was a positive attitude or an enjoyment of math. I quote, "Based on our data, the unique contribution of positive attitude to math achievement is as large as the contribution from IQ." And a lot of this stuff really does make sense. As the book Thanks talks about, when you practice gratitude and you kind of take into account the blessings you have in your life and have a more positive view on things, you tend to be happier. And as this article points out, happier workers do tend to perform better at their jobs. Now, being positive and grateful and counting your blessings is awesome, and having a more positive outlook on life will get you more success. However, what I'm talking about is very different from another thing that a lot of people online like to push, which is toxic positivity. It's important to not confuse these two concepts. Having a positive, growth-oriented mindset and being overly positive about everything are two very different things. For example, if you lose a loved one, if you lose a dream job, if you go through a really difficult breakup, the idea is not to be like, oh wow, I'm so glad that horrible thing happened because now I can grow and heal. The idea is to not make your suffering worse by compounding it with a negative attitude. In Buddhism, there's a concept of two arrows. The two arrows concept is typically explained as such. There's an archer who fires an arrow up into the air, and then it comes down and it hits him, and it inflicts pain on him. The archer then fires a second arrow, and it again lands on him and hits him a second time, doubling his pain. The first arrow is kind of the uncontrollable stuff that happens in our life. It's stuff that sucks, it's difficult things, and it's the intense emotional pain that we'll feel when we do have hard stuff happen in our lives. But the second arrow is completely within our control. The second arrow is our emotional response and reaction to it, which can dramatically make things better or it can make things worse. And this is not just some hippy-dippy thing that super happy people use in order to make themselves feel even better. This is advice that has gotten people through some of the most difficult situations ever imaginable. As there's a famous quote that goes, "Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." This quote is from Viktor Frankl, who's a Holocaust survivor, and this is what got him through those incredibly difficult, grueling times. He's focusing on not hitting himself with that second arrow and taking things as positively and as in stride as he could and minimizing the pain that he felt and using the power of interpretation and using the power of positivity to push himself through some of the most difficult, brutal things that any human being ever has had to go through. And if we really think about it, a lot of the time when we're super mad or we're super angry, it's not over something that's life or death. It is over rush hour traffic. In situations like those, it becomes very apparent that our toxic mindset is kind of what's infesting everything that we're doing with our lives and making our pain much worse. How do we tell though if something is kind of an event that should be causing us lots of distress, grief, and anger, or if we truly are just making our suffering worse by interpreting it in the worst way possible? A really helpful tool I like is called the universal scale of importance. This can help a lot when it comes to determining how upset we should be over something happening in our life. On the scale, 0 represents something that is not important at all. It will have no impact on you within a day, a week, or even a month. Whereas 100 represents something life or death. Using this scale, we can typically figure out if the problem is the situation or if it's just the way that we are interpreting it and if we are the ones causing ourselves much more distress than we need to. So now that we've gone over kind of having a positive mindset, having a growth mindset, what are some practical examples of what this looks like in our day-to-day lives? And how can we actually increase our luck? There are a couple of really simple things we can do. So we're going to talk about those first, and then I'll talk about how you can apply them. Really common things that people struggle with that are very luck-based, like things like dating and your work life. So the practical tips are super straightforward. Simply listing 3 times that you were lucky every day, practicing gratitude by listing 5 things you're grateful for, can be really effective daily habits. And there is research to back this, again, in that book, Thanks, that we were talking about earlier. The other big thing that is talked about in the serendipity mindset is to say yes to more things and watch out for hidden cynicism in the back of your head. Every time you kind of have an opportunity come up and you feel an inner critic being like, this won't work out, this is not going to happen, there's no point to doing this, go ahead and say yes anyway. Get out of your comfort zone and go into things with a positive mindset, expecting that things will probably go well. And if they don't go well, you have a fun story to tell. Once we talk about this in practice, it becomes a little easier to see kind of how this works. Let's talk about one of the biggest luck-based things that happens to a lot of people, which is dating. Again, quick note, these are a lot more subjective, and these definitely not are science-based. This is just kind of how I have applied these principles into my life. I used to really struggle in this domain a lot. Dating was something that was super difficult for me, and I used to think, oh, woe is me, it's because I don't have looks, I don't have money, I don't have this, I don't have that, etc., etc. But the reality is that oftentimes when I would get an opportunity to go approach someone, to go talk to someone, I would just assume that it wouldn't work out. And because of that, I would never actually get a lot of the opportunities that I needed in order to improve my dating life. The fear of rejection and the certainty I had that things would not work out well and the negative mindset with which I went into a lot of situations with made it so that I was nervous, on edge, anxious, and I was a lot more reserved and held back, and my confidence was diminished. And because of this, I wasn't able to be my authentic self and meet people more easily. The rare times that dating did work out for me was when I was in that positive mindset. I was really confident, I was myself, and I found that I had no problem finding people to date once I was in that mindset in rare moments. If you are someone who struggles with dating and who has a very hard time finding partners, ask yourself, when was the last time you randomly approached someone at a party or something like that? When was the last time you asked one of your friends to set you up on a blind date and went on it just to see how it goes? When was the last time that you went to like a club or something like that you were interested in, and then you went and actually met people and had an open mind and decided to see what would happen? Are you the type that when you get rejected for the first time, you tend to tell yourself things like nothing will ever work out, nothing's ever going to be good, I'm never going to find someone, etc., etc.? If so, this might be the key thing that's kind of holding you back. If you apply a more positive mindset, if you try and take a lesson from each of the failures you maybe have or each of the difficulties that you encounter, you might be able to have a much greater success level with your dating life because you won't be so scared, anxious, and tense, and you'll be more open to opportunities when they do present themselves. So when there is that cute person who's standing there all alone at a party, you won't fill your head with negative thoughts as to why this person will not talk to you, and you will just go up and talk to them, and who knows, maybe you can find a connection. Now let's dive into things like work life as well. When it comes to finding a job and stuff like that, luck often plays a huge role. You happen to bump into the right person at the right time, and they happen to have an open role that you just happen to be perfect for. So again, if we look at that kind of positive mindset and mentality, the way that you can kind of get around this is put yourself in situations where you'll be more likely to bump into that kind of person. And again, go in with a positive mindset. Don't assume that you're not going to get a job. Don't assume that the person doesn't want to talk to you, so on and so forth. Just find opportunities when you can, apply to as many positions as possible, and assume the best. Let's say none of that works out. If we think back to the 2 arrows example, you're only being hit with that single arrow of not getting a job or not having career success. You're not also spinning these catastrophizing stories in your head about how you are never going to get a job, how you're completely unemployable, how everything sucks, so on and so forth, that only serve to worsen your suffering and in the end make it harder for you to get a job because of how much emotional turmoil it's creating. I found that applying this mentality made things like doing a job search, getting an internship, so on and so forth, a lot more easy because I was a lot more prone to see opportunities. I was a lot more excited to go to things like job fairs. I had a much more positive attitude. Whereas when I did have that doom and gloom mentality, it felt almost impossible for me to get anywhere because I was a lot more closed down, a lot more reserved. I would see opportunities and not take them due to my negative overthinking, so on and so forth. Again, these are much more subjective examples of how this has played out in my life. If you have any experiences like this, comment them down below. Talk about how maybe you have seen that a positive attitude shift can result in much better outcomes. I hope this video helps. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.